Hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg, and I'd like to welcome you to the first day of Mindfulness and Compassion Week. I'm going to be talking about resilience, which is a topic that many of us are really scrutinizing very carefully, having been through a time of so much loss and disruption and confusion and shattered expectations and uh, moving forward into perhaps new territory and so on. I think that's something that happens for many of us when we go through really intense times is that we begin to cling to what we feel is somewhat secure, whatever that is, some identity, some sense of who we are. And we start to view ourselves as more or less static entities. The thing we're feeling right now feels like it will be permanent. It also tends to feel like we are the only one who is feeling it. But in fact, each one of us is like a dynamic system that's constantly in flux. And as dynamic systems, we have an inherent capacity for resilience and ability to move through disruption, a capacity to reorganize, to self-repair when we've been harmed, when we've been challenged. And in this way, any one of us as a human being, we're not that different from an ecosystem. And there are actually many parallels between the natural world and our own experience as individuals. Every ecosystem contains within itself the ability to recalibrate and attempts to move toward equilibrium. But just as something like pollution can overwhelm an ecosystem, taxing it to the point where it loses its ability to easily bounce back and gracefully shift into an altered state, so too can any one of us be overwhelmed by experiences that create a state where damage in our bodies or our mind starts to go deep. And we start to lose that capacity or not actuate that capacity for resilience because we get stuck in fixedness or rigidity, in certainty that things will never change. And so we lose our flexibility. But when we remember that any system, including our lives as individuals, is a process, we see this constant flux and moment to moment change that is the hint about larger changes that could be possible, about returning to a value system, for example, that we may hold very dear, but has not been largely in effect for a while. Or we can remember, oh, if I do the good that's in front of me, if I really try to help my neighbor out or something like that, that will fulfill my more basic sense of aspiration in life, which is to be a force for good, something like that. We remember we can take abstract theories, things we cherish, things we idealize in a way, and work to make them real. And that means moment to moment. We see that everything influences us, and we also have the capacity to influence the world around us. One of the things that happens, I think, when this kind of intensity of change and disruption and loss and uncertainty is that we lose a sense of agency. We're just like stymied, like, what do I do? And, I've said and written in many places that one of my idols is sort of like my heroine is the Statue of Liberty, is a little one right there. I have many little replicas of the Statue of Liberty made of strange rubber green material. And when I think of the Statue of Liberty, as I have since a child, of course, I think of her welcome, even to the seemingly unwanted, like even you, that no one else wants. You have a home here, and I will pronounce it that you are welcome here. Even you, who has been rejected everywhere, has a kind of inner worth, and I will welcome you and really make sure you know that. So I've always just loved her as a symbol, as an image, and it's only been more lately in writing about her when I was realizing that, oh, she's actually a woman on the move. She's got a leg up, she's in mid stride, that it's not a passive welcome, it's a movement. She's taking action, and so can we. Even if it seems like it's very small, it's not that meaningful, it's certainly not systems changing, all in and of itself, but it is what we have to contribute, and we have to contribute it, in fact, or nothing will happen. So how do we recover our sense of agency? It's tied into our recognition of resilience, that nothing is static, there's movement, there's flow. And it's tied into the kind of practices or exercises that we can actually do to strengthen the ability to take a step into the unknown, to begin again, to be resilient, to not linger in a seemingly reified, solid, frozen terrain of being lost, but coming back and starting over and finding that sense of renewal. Um, we actually can train in that, oddly enough. It's a strange way of saying it, but it's actually true that we have a capacity within ourselves that we can cultivate and strengthen. And it all leads to the power of resilience. And this is what we do in meditation practice, actually. So, to begin with, what I've seen is that within meditation practice, there's an ability to recover. And it happens in a seemingly almost simplistic way. We choose an object of awareness. We rest our attention on that object, which is another thing I'll talk about in a minute. And lo and behold, our attention doesn't stay there. It goes off. We're wandering into the past or into the future, into judgment, into speculation. And they say that when we consider the past in this sort of rambling way, it's usually to a place, or very often to a place, where we now have some regret. There's something we said, something we didn't say, something we did or held back from doing, where we now have some regret. And we go over it and over it and over it and over it. Not in a useful way, like thinking about lessons learned or how to make amends. We just go over it and over it and over it and over it. And we lose a huge amount of our life force, of our energy that way. And I'd say especially, we jump into the future and we create a scenario that has not happened, that may never happen. And we're filled with anxiety about that. And it's kind of too much to bear. And again, we lose such a huge amount of our energy, of our life force. So what we do in foundational exercises in meditation is we realize we've been gone from that foundational object, whatever it is. We practice letting go gently. It's what one of my teachers once called exercising the letting go muscle. We practice letting go. We practice bringing our attention back to that original object, that chosen object. We let go and we begin again. We let go and we start over. This is like the fundamental movement in meditation practice. And I think it's the first thing I ever learned. And I think it's the most important thing I ever learned. So that was 50 years ago in beginning meditation practice, truly. Because every single day, even not in a crazy time, but every single day, maybe we fall down and we have to pick ourselves up, or let someone else help us up and we have to start over. Or we make a mistake and there has to be a course correction. Or we have like a brilliant, bold aspiration and we completely forget it. We lose sight of it. We have to start over every day. So many times a day, we're actually exercising that muscle of letting go and beginning again. And it doesn't mean that we pretend it wasn't a mistake or we don't really pay attention to lessons learned. We do. But that kind of endless distraction of just like being down on ourselves and blaming ourselves and being lost in regret, it doesn't do any good. And so we learn actually to start over. And that is obviously an important ingredient in resilience. If we do that over and over again, we just keep gathering our attention around an object, then over time, what happens is that our attention is much steadier. We have a sense of centeredness. We have a sense of stability. So that as all these various experiences come and go, and feelings and images and everything just arises and passes away, we don't feel so completely off balance all the time. And we have an ability from that vantage point to be able to see things more clearly, and always to remember that they're constantly changing. When I said we choose an object of awareness and we rest our attention on it, that's an important consideration. It's an exercise in simply being. Whereas, let's say it's, a mantra, an image, the sensation of the in and out breath, phrases of loving kindness, whatever that home base object, that original object may be, we may have a tendency to kind of want to get a death grip on it, thinking that our attention won't wander, and it'll actually wander more. We learn how to rest. We learn how to simply be. And this too is a quality that is restorative. And remember, to take that step into the unknown, to have resilience, to be able to begin again, we need some energy. We can't just be crushed by what is going on. We have to have some source of energy. And part of that is restoring, it's recovering, it's filling up the tank again in some way. And this is very important. So even just that simple foundational exercise, choosing an object of awareness, resting our attention on it, realizing we've gotten distracted, gently letting go, and coming back, has all of that potential for massively deepening the power and the ability of resilience for us. And then we use that as a foundation for being able to pay attention differently to whatever may arise in our field of experience, internal or external. Let's take difficult feelings that may well come up for us. We are sitting, as an example, and waves of anger, waves of fear, waves of anxiety, all kinds of things will logically be arising, certainly in a time like this. I am one example of somebody who's, lived in a very isolated way this last year. Not everyone has. I certainly have, and I feel tremendously connected on mediums like Zoom and whatever. So it's not that kind of isolation, but I anticipate a good deal of culture shock going back into a city or, the airport. It's just almost unthinkable. And I can see that it's going to take a lot of patience with myself and allowing myself to feel what I feel. And it's an important consideration that we need to allow the dignity of every feeling to exist. In other words, don't get down on yourself for what you're feeling. That's different than being overwhelmed by a feeling. And it's certainly different than being overwhelmed to the extent that it starts guiding your actions, guiding your choices. Probably my favorite definition of mindfulness, which I've used many times, has come from this article I read in the New York Times many years ago about a very early pilot project bringing mindfulness into the classroom, which is much more prevalent nowadays than it was then. And this was a fourth grade classroom in Oakland, California. So the kids were like 9 or 10 years old, and the journalist asked one of the kids, like, what is mindfulness? What is mindfulness? And he responded by saying, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought that is a great definition of mindfulness, because what does it imply? It implies knowing you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after you've sent the email, not after you've lashed out at somebody, but really as it's beginning. And it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger. It's like if you just get swamped, overwhelmed, consumed by these various feelings that come and go, you're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really frustrating. And at the same time, if you're ashamed of what you're feeling and you're afraid of what you're feeling and you try to deny it, and you try to repress it and push it down, you're going to get tighter and tighter and tighter until you explode. It's just not going to work. So we want to find that place in the middle where we can be with anything that comes up in an open and interested way. We're actually taking an interest in what our experience is. And that leads us, first of all, to see much more deeply into the heart of it, the layers of feeling, say, within that anger, the sadness, the fear, the helplessness, all of that. It also allows us to see this too is an alive system, constantly changing and moving. It's not like I am such an angry person and I always will be. What happens as we watch that alive system coming and going and moving is space. There's some kind of spaciousness that arises. And in that spaciousness, we might decide to take action that's more creative. We may see many more options than we had seen when we were just like in the grip of that fury. I like to think of that kid who's 9 or 10 years old thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week. It didn't work out that well. Let me try this. So it's not like we're passive or complacent that we don't take action, but it's a more like awakened action, because it's born out of that bigger sense of possibility. So we don't denounce what we're feeling or try to deny it, whatever it is. We feel what we feel, and we need to acknowledge what's happening in the moment. But do we really want to take every feeling to heart? No. Do we want to nurse it and amplify it? Maybe not. Maybe we want a more balanced perspective with whatever's happening, so that we can just take another look at our options and so on. I was recently listening to this podcast with Barbara Fredrickson, who's a friend of mine, who's a researcher in positive psychology at the University of North Carolina. And often in her intervention for bringing about positive states, she'll use loving kindness meditation. So we've talked a lot about that. So a positive state is something like gratitude or loving kindness or equanimity, generosity, something like that. And Barbara has a theory, which is actually named after her, the Fredrickson theory of broaden and build. And that is, if we cultivate these practices, generosity, gratitude, loving kindness, our perspective on life will broaden, it will expand, it will open. We'll have that sense of being able to breathe free. And that made a lot of sense to me, because I know what it's like to be caught in the opposite. Again, it's not just feeling the opposite, it's caught in it, immersed in it, in the anger and the greed and the so on of the different states, and how constricting they are. And our world gets very small, and we don't see much possibility, and we feel caught, and how different it is when we have that sense of expansiveness. And as a weird note, but a true note, they say that they've done research on cultivating these positive states, and that people's peripheral vision will actually improve from it because the world gets wider. Isn't that weird? I think that's extremely weird and also very interesting. And the build part of it is a sense of building resource. And this is very important, that when we're in any kind of situation, if we feel depleted from the beginning and there's no wherewithal within us in order to meet what's going on, especially in a time of adversity, then we just feel helpless. But if we have some sense of resource, we don't feel so alone. We feel like we're part of a community, or we have some acquaintance with a sense of inner strength. Even in a very, very difficult situation, we have more confidence that we can meet it. And in fact, we can meet it in a much better way. It takes some looking at what our experience actually is and what fosters a sense of, oh, I can breathe free, I see options, I can move forward, and what has us kind of contract and just feel incredibly small and limited. I think about this experiment that another scientist friend of mine, Richie Davidson, did at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where he's a neuroscientist, so he had everybody in fMRI machines looking at their brains. And he had a group of people who'd been practicing mindfulness meditation for about 8 weeks. And then he had a group of people who'd never practiced. And somehow Richie got permission to induce physical pain in people, which he did. And it's very interesting for us because physical pain is also symbolic of emotional pain, of heartache, of disappointment. So it means a lot to sort of look at how people relate to physical pain. And what he found, which was very interesting, was that the most significant difference between the group of people who had meditated and those who had not happened after the pain was withdrawn. Because the non-meditators would, go through whatever reactive state to the pain. And then as the pain was withdrawn, they'd flip immediately into a cycle of anticipation. When's it coming back? How bad will it be? Maybe it'll be even worse. And so they never got any peace. They never got a break. They never got any rest. They never got any relief. And so, of course, they had much less wherewithal with which to meet the next instance where the pain returned. Whereas the meditators would have whatever reaction to pain because that is a human reality. The pain was withdrawn. They relaxed. They could let it go. They could simply be with the state of relief and release. And therefore, they had some peace. They had some rest and could really get that sense of rebuilding that wherewithal. So we learn to be with difficult things in a different way. And that is an enormous source of strength for cultivating resilience. And the other part of that, the other side of that, is remembering to take in the joy. Even in like a completely miserable day with so much going wrong, there is, first of all, if we're breathing, that's something to be grateful for. And often there are small joys, small delights that we just overlook. We're too busy, we're too guilty, like, oh, it doesn't feel right to enjoy this when so much is going wrong for so many others or for myself. It feels too self-centered, it feels stupid. It feels too small, it's not like grand enough. Whatever it might be, we have to remember that this is one of the strongest things that feeds us, that gives us that sense of inner strength and ability to meet the next bout of adversity or difficulty. That something fills us, it uplifts us, it connects us to something bigger than the situation which maybe has been defining us and really bringing us down. And it can be something really small. Look at a child smile, look at a sunset. remembering to be grateful for a breath, things like that. It sounds a little cliched, I know, and saccharine, but in fact, it's extremely powerful. And it will help create a very different kind of balance. And then I think that one of the great unheralded ingredients for being able to resilient is the power of compassion. It's first of all compassion for ourselves when things are hard. And I listen to language very carefully, and I don't, of course, use it perfectly all the time by any means, but um, often people ask me a question and my antenna kind of go up. It's sort of like people say, let's say at the end of a retreat, they would say, how can I keep this kind of concentration all the time? Or at the end of a workshop, the end of a talk, the end of something, they would say, how can I stay mindful all day long at work? And my response is always, that's not going to happen. We're not enter this kind of static state of seeming perfection, somehow working hard for it and having a great breakthrough experience. It's not like that. We go through cycles. Sometimes we're exhausted. Sometimes we get overwhelmed. Sometimes we do lash out, whatever it might be. But we can start over. We kind of come back to center, that sense of being more balanced. Something in us wants to come back to being more balanced and more in kind of a steady state, of clarity and connection. And what we find, even though it's hard to notice sometimes, is that we come back sooner and sooner. And we come back more gracefully. We come back with a better sense of humor. But we come back. And it's hard. I've seen through years of teaching how people often don't give themselves enough credit because they say, well, I still blew it. I still lost it. It was the same stupid little provocation that got me going. But we don't realize that, being lost used to last 2 hours. Now it lasts 20 minutes. And that's a big change in the quality of one's life. And that 2 hours didn't just become 20 minutes. It just kind of gradually recedes. But that is how change actually happens, and we become free, even though we still get lost at different times. And compassion, giving ourselves a break, realizing, this is part of the human condition. It's not just me. It's never just me. That is one of the most healing properties, and it's something that will allow us to really go on and make progress and take the next step, because we're not just devastated by all of that judgment, which we might otherwise be piling on top of ourselves. And then that also is the prelude to compassion for others. To do that one small thing that may appear in front of us, to recognize that we have to do it, and that it will also connect us to something bigger, to that light, which is the fact that our lives are intertwined, that we live in an interconnected universe, that no matter how alone we might feel, in truth, we are never all alone. And so it's very important to be able to kind of exercise that kind of kindness. And I'll close with just recollecting actually something that happened. It was the last day that I taught physically in a room with people until the next time, whenever that is. And it was March 2020. I was in New York City, and I was teaching a class, and it was, like looking back, it was kind of eerie. It was 120 people in a windowless room, so I was like, all right. And everyone was very anxious. There was just a tremendous anxiety in the air because there was so much that was unknown. It was so scary, and people were starting to get sick. And this is New York. And the venue where I was teaching has this way of doing it so that the speaker sits in the audience until they're formally introduced, and then they get up on the stage and they begin teaching or speaking. So sitting in the audience, and the woman sitting next to me was like hugely anxious, and reasonably so, And she said, "I don't know. I almost didn't come, and then I came, and I don't know what to do, and I feel so scared all the time." And I said, "Well, there are ways of breathing, which, by the way, there are. Um, which are most notably they center around having your out breath be longer than your in breath." And then they say that the parasympathetic nervous system will take over from the sympathetic nervous system, and your blood pressure will likely start going down, and you'll just kind of chill. So I said, "Well, there are these breathing exercises that might help." And she wasn't interested. So then I said, "Well, there's loving kindness meditation, which is my favorite way of establishing a kind of bigger sense of connection to the world, and not being so kind of engrossed in my own situation." And she wasn't interested in that either. So then I just looked at her and I said, "Is there anyone you can help?" And she lit up. She became like really radiant. And she said, "Well, I have this elderly neighbor, and maybe I'll slip a note under her door and see if I can get her some groceries." And I could just tell she had found this kind of rest inside. And energy was returning, and a sense of purpose, and so on. So I've never forgotten that. And of course, we've been through a time where our ordinary activities for some people have been really blocked, and we haven't been able to help or reach out or just be together in old ways. And that is both perhaps shifting again, but there's been some way. I mean, I've met people uh, online, because I haven't gone anywhere, who tell me they're writing letters to people. And I thought, that's interesting, like people are like finding pen pals again, or they're finding ways of reaching out, or people in New York who tell me, like, I know the phone numbers now of all my neighbors. I never even knew their names before. And we just check in on one another and make a point of that, of doing the seemingly small thing, which will be a prime ingredient in having the energy and clarity and sense of connection that we really all need for resilience. Okay, so let's do a short practice together. I want to go back to basics, to that kind of primary object, choosing a central object, resting our attention on it. And when our attention wanders, bringing all of that into practice. Compassion for ourselves. Don't blame yourself. Don't call yourself a failure. You just recognize, oh, not with that object anymore. Some gentleness in letting go. And a real heartfulness, almost a kind of happiness in being able to begin again. We let go and we begin again. If you have to do that 10 billion times, it's all right. It really is. What that central object can be is really anything. Very commonly, although not exclusively, it's the actual sensations of the in and out breath. So that's how I'm going to guide it. Although if that doesn't work for you, that's fine. Just choose something else, your hands touching or some other thing happening in your body. That would be fine. Okay, so you can sit comfortably, close your eyes or not, however you feel most at ease. Start by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing your experience to come and go. And of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. Just let the sound wash through you. And bring your attention to the feeling of your body sitting, whatever sensations you discover. See if you can feel the earth supporting you. Feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space, we think about picking up our finger and poking it in the air. But space is already touching us, it's always touching us. Bring your attention to your hands and see if you can move from the more conceptual level, like go fingers, to the world of direct sensation, picking up pulsing, throbbing, pressure, whatever it might be. You don't have to name these things, but feel them. And then bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly, the nostrils, at the chest, or at the abdomen. You can find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath. Just this one. And as images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, if they're not very strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. But if something comes and it is very strong, it pulls you away, you get lost in thought or spun out in a fantasy or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. You can realize you've been gone, just gently let go and begin again. Bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. Nothing's been lost, nothing's been ruined. This is the really important moment to be able to let go and start over. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you so much.